Unmute.
Let me see if this causes a problem. That's the problem. It's getting feedback from this microphone. Let me see if how about now? Nikki, can you hear us? Nikki?
Oh yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay,
Yeah.
let's use this one.
It's fine if everybody can hear. Okay, good. So the technology is working. All right. So thanks everybody for joining us. Little bit about AITP. So AITP was founded in like 1951. So we've been around for a bit. We're one of the U.S. largest tech associations. So our mission is to provide education and leadership and promote technology. So that's why we're here today. But today we're talking about diversity in tech. So for our panel discussion, we have our moderator, Lynn Dome. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself after I introduce everyone. And then we have Chip Joseph, who is a senior manager of global tech for TMSW. And Nikki Robinson is on video. She's global director of, she is the security architect and adjunct professor for IBM. Hey, Nikki. And then we have David Martin. He's a global director of inclusion and diversity for Gallagher Insurance. And Sarah Khan, CISO for Hightower Advisors. So with that said, I'll let you take it away, Lynn, and get everybody introduced and start talking about diversity in tech. And cyber, tech and cyber.
Favorite topics here. So I see a lot of familiar faces. So thank you for joining us here today. My name is Lynn Dome, and I'm Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WICIS, W-I-C-Y-S, and we pronounce it WICIS, like we sisters, because that's exactly what we are. We are a cyber sisterhood. So we're a global organization. We're comprised of women, men, allies, and advocates that all have a strong mission and passion to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity, because we're all here, hands on deck, making an impact on the cybersecurity workforce. So we're not a women's only organization. We're an organization that cares about the workforce, and so therefore we care about the recruitment, the retention, and advancement of women, and that's what we do. So we have training programs, we have many different initiatives, we have over 5,800 members, representation in over 70 countries. We have professional affiliates in Africa, Australia, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, UK, and throughout the United States. We also have specialty affiliates in cloud security. We have critical infrastructure. We have WICIS military, WICIS pride, WICIS neurodiversity, WICIS BISO, WICIS, you name it. We have artificial intelligence. We have all sorts of different initiatives there. And then we also, on top of that, have over 170 student chapters, with Microsoft Philanthropies just funded us a new initiative of ours, which is that we are to reach 23 more countries by April 2025. No, by April 2023. We're to reach 25 more countries by April 2023. So yeah, so that one is moving along strong, so we just hired a new program manager to move that initiative forward as well. So if you haven't heard of us, just check us out. It's enough.
Do I have to go after? My job does not sound very exciting right now. My name is Chip Joseph, and I am the global lead for a company called TMSW, the marketing store worldwide. We are a marketing slash packaging company representing McDonald's. So the best reference is the Happy Meal. We created and we facilitate the Happy Meal, as well as the Monopoly game, T-Mobile Tuesdays. We do all of the marketing for Starbucks, so those little red cups that everyone has to drink out of in the Christmas time. We do that, as well as Wendy's and Shake Shack, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm the global lead for the marketing store. I have team members in the U.S., of course, the UK, Paris, Duisburg, parts of Asia, including Hong Kong, Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what I do, and that is who I am.
Yeah, I can see. Can Nikki hear us?
Oh yeah, is it my turn?
Yes.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I am Nikki Robinson. By day, I joke that, a security architect at IBM. By night, I'm an adjunct professor. I have a DSc in cybersecurity where I studied vulnerability scoring, and just recently completed a PhD in human factors where I studied vulnerability chaining and a new concept, vulnerability chaining blindness. So heavy focus in vulnerability management, but I work on the CISO's remediation team at IBM. So I work on cases, investigations, building new environments, so you name it, I'm probably got my hands in it. For teaching, I teach a number of different fields, but everything from quantitative methods to cybersecurity architecture. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey. Well, David Martin, I'm the Global Director of Inclusion and Diversity. I've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion work for about 17 years now, primarily in the financial services industry, just down the street at Bank of Montreal, as you all know, at BMO Harris Bank. But that was one part of my work. I also worked for Beam Suntory, which for some folks may not know Beam Suntory unless I mentioned the brands, which is Jim Beam and Maker's Mark and all that. So this $10, thank you for that. I also, like Nikki, teach as well. I'm an adjunct professor at UIC, and I teach global HR and talent management for them. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Khan, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Hightower, which is a financial services fintech organization. It was founded about 12 years ago. I've been with them for 10 years now. So we went from the startup phase, being employee number 11, to about 2,000 now. So just basically part of the entire technology build, and then ensuring that security is built around it. Thank you for joining us today.
Great, okay. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Diversifying the cybersecurity workforce is a topic that we keep continually talking about. We know at WESIS in 2014, women represented 11% of the cybersecurity workforce. That's why we came into existence. And now the recent studies showed that for us, women represent roughly 20 to 24% of the cybersecurity workforce, which still those statistics are a little debatable because all the different organizations from employer partners that I have, they're not necessarily seeing those type of stats on their teams, so they're a little questionable there. But we're here because we want everyone to walk away with intentional actions about what we're doing with allyship and inclusion and equity and how we can make a difference in the technology workforce. And so we're going to get lots of different perspectives here. As you can see, Paul and Sally definitely put intentional thought into having diversity of thought in their panel. So it's going to be a nice, lively conversation and hopefully bring key takeaways. So let's go ahead and get started on what's working, what's not working, and what can we do better at. And so my first question here is, you can wait for Nikki to join us.
We got disconnected.
So you can go to the microphone setting.
When we went virtual with the WESIS conference, like the first keynote, of course, we had the same video. Then we went to
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Like you could practice and practice and try.
Yeah, we're back.
Nikki's back. Yay.
Yeah, we're back.
All right, great. So my first question is, with all great companies, with all great intentions, diversifying the workforce, sometimes there are some challenges there. And so I just want to kind of level set the conversation where hiring diverse talent isn't always necessarily happening. And so just to, again, bring the conversation together here, why do you think that is? And I think it would be helpful if we could just get your unique perspectives, everyone here on the panel, and then we'll kind of dig in a little deeper. So Chip, we'll start with you since you're nice and close to me.
Oh man, well, it's gone first. So So the question is, why do I think it's not happening?
Yes, yes.
I think in a capitalist country that, for the most part, the first order of business is business and making money. So to ask a company and to ask hiring managers and senior leadership and et cetera, to slow down and actually intentionally make it a plan to hire diverse talent is a big ask. And in a lot of instances, certainly in our case, it goes against the grain of what we're trying to do. We have clients who, again, including McDonald's and Wendy's and Shake Shack and Starbucks, and as much as these companies tout that they will support diverse hiring, there's still certain numbers and initiatives and projects and things that they also have to get done. So sometimes those two things, it can be a push and pull. So I think that's at the center or at the crux of the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I appreciate that global talent acquisition perspective, that
Absolutely.
you're bringing to the table here.
Yeah, and then globally, I'm glad you brought that up. To add to it, now you're talking, there are different rules and regulations and et cetera in Paris and in Duisburg and in Australia and some other places that where my team sits. So then it even muddies the water even further. So again, these things can be solved if there is a slow down period, but to ask senior leaders and to ask the CEO to sponsor a slow down so we can toss in the idea of diversity, it's a big ask. It's really a big ask.
Yeah, there's many challenges for that as part of business.
Many challenges, to say the least.
Yeah. Nikki, how about your perspective?
Yeah, speaking as, so I began my career in IT operations, started on help desk and worked my way up. And I am very used to being sort of the only woman in the room or the only woman on the team. And it can be a challenging environment. It can be difficult, to speak very frankly. It can be hard to, prove your talent and show your technical skills, and to do that continuously, it can be somewhat challenging. So I think that's part of it. It's a difficult field to get into and then to stay in. Because it's incredibly challenging, the workload can be really, really a lot. And especially, I can speak as having 2 children. It was one of those, I'm getting calls at 2 a.m. because I'm in an operations environment and I have a newborn. This is really challenging. So I think as far as getting diversity and getting diverse groups within STEM fields, I think it can be incredibly challenging just to even get into the field, which I think is part of the issue. And then I think, once women are in the field, or it can be challenging to stay there and say, am I going to stay in an operations environment that may be technical? So I think the industry itself is somewhat challenging.
Yeah, I totally agree, Nikki. I mean, that's why we could recruit all we want into the workforce, but retention, and we're going to touch base on retention in a little bit, is just such a critical piece because it's part of the life cycle, is to be able to retain that talent and then build upon that. And that's really what's going to drive the change needed in the workforce, is a continual effort, slowing down and building up. So, David.
I would say this work also requires very intentional focus. One of my mentors once told me, you find what you search for. And I think that, what he meant by that was, are you really looking at, diversity from a number of different angles and considering all those different pools of diversity? Because often what happens is, and at least in my experience, when I mention to senior leaders or group of leaders diversity, they think we're talking about just one thing, women, right? We need more women. Then we've covered all our bases and we're good. And I challenge that to say, yes, you're right, we absolutely do, but we also need to think about it from other perspectives as well. People with different abilities, LGBTQ, military veterans, people of color, etc. So from a wider spectrum, because that's where people, I think, fall into sometimes traps, into thinking that that's all they need to do. And what, other things that some people also fall into the trap is thinking that recruiting is the silver bullet for all of our problems.
Tell
with
me
diversity,
about it.
right? Exactly.
Richard, here, keep my $10.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, that is one piece of the puzzle, but there are other pieces that you need to think about. Is your culture inclusive? Do you focus on inclusion? Do you make it not a check the box nice thing to do, or is it truly part of what you're thinking about? If you're looking at your team and you say, is it diverse, right? From the lens that I just described, right? Or is it not? And if it's not, then where do we need to go to start fielding maybe candidates and start building, diverse slates? But more importantly, what can we do about our culture today that we're not doing? Is it educational? Maybe we need to host some, sessions where we're having some real tough, courageous conversations in the room, and people are being allowed to speak freely about their experiences so that others can learn about it and then make those changes. So from my view, there's a number of different things, I think, to answer your question that could be done.
Yeah, I love it. When David introduced himself, I don't know if anyone paid attention or noticed that he introduces himself as inclusion and diversity lead. Well, that to me, that's how we always focus our efforts as inclusion, because conclusion is the foundation, is the culture of the organization. You build a culture of inclusion, diversity will come and rise and be able to be retained. So I really like that perspective, and we'll be touching more on that too. So, and Sarah.
So I feel like perhaps in universities or just colleges, the exposure of cybersecurity to minority groups or females, right? So I feel like there isn't maybe proper education, or there could be something more that's done to educate the folks that are going into the cybersecurity field. So, my background is Indian. Generally, as you guys may have noticed, a lot of Indians tend to go into either medicine or technology. And I think in that culture, there's a lot of exposure to tech. But in America, what I've noticed is that there's probably not as much exposure to it if you're a female or if you're of different groups, just because you're just demographically whatever is around is what you're exposed to. So I think we just need to do a better job of, if we've made it in the security field, reaching back to the universities that perhaps we have connections to or where we came from, and being able to educate some of the folks there, be mentors, and then be able to bring them into workforce. I try to bring them in as interns from my high school. I mentor some of them. So we've had 2 or 3 success stories where our interns have now become cybersecurity directors. So I think it's just reaching back out to maybe areas that we've seen gaps, and then just making sure that we create that path for them and just educate the folks around just so they get more exposure to the field.
Hit the nail on the head. Like, it's hard to be what you cannot see. And when you don't see yourself in those shoes, it's hard to aspire to become that type of professional. So thank you for paying it forward with that. All right, so what are some of the best practices that you've seen? And we'll just stick with this pattern. So there's no surprises.
Got it. One of the things that we do from a best practice standpoint is, and it sounds very simple on the surface, but we kind of went below the surface and took it a little deeper, is making sure that there are diverse candidates for every single opportunity that we are recruiting for. And in order to do that, first and foremost, you have to have senior leadership buy-in all the way from the CEO down. Mm-hmm. And it has to be real. It can't be some pretty slides during a presentation. It has to be real buy-in. And again, back to my original point, there is a period of slowdown, and there is a period where managers do tend to get a little anxious, whereas time to fill for certain roles that are crucial because of this new initiative, on the front side, may have taken it from a 45 to 60 day time frame to maybe 90 days just because of that front end effort to find and look for more diverse candidates. But as we, first of all, what we did as well, when we put this into play, a lot of managers were very anxious about it, so we gave a 90-day time period where we put it out and said, okay, on that day, we will be requiring at least 2 diverse candidates for every single role that we are recruiting for. So everyone knew, everyone was prepared for it. Part of the managing director's, part of senior leadership's responsibility was assisting a recruiting team in finding outside resources, whether it was female groups or African American groups and technology, whatever it was. We went on this 90-day hunt to find different sources that could feed us, that could feed us, that could feed us. So when this initiative was finally put into play, and the CEO, he had a hard approach to it. He had a hard approach to it. Again, there was some pain on the front end, but now, total buy-in. The biggest thing that happened after, say, a few months down the road, after we put this policy into play, the culture started changing. The excitement towards diversity and inclusion started changing. People's attitudes towards it started changing. To David and to Sarah's point, once they started exposing themselves to it, now they started getting creative, coming up with new ideas. Now they started actually purposefully finding other individuals. Oh, I forgot so-and-so. He's an African American. I think he's in cybersecurity. Or I think he mentioned someone. So now you start listening different. And you start, it's like when they say, I haven't seen a brown card, and somebody mentions the brown card, and as soon as you walk out the door, you're going to see 10 brown cards right Wacker Drive. Well, the same thing happened. Now there is an excitement about it. Now the managing directors and everyone, now they want to reach out to HBCUs. Now they want to reach out to high schools in the inner cities and things of that nature. Now there is an excitement towards it. But on the front end, it was painful.
Yeah.
It was painful.
So it's always boiling down to like peeling back the layers and educating. It's like you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
Until you're at that place of understanding, and then you're like, aha, the light bulb goes off, and then things come into alignment from there. So.
And if I could throw one more thing.
Oh, absolutely.
If that's okay. The other thing that we did was organization-wide. We came up with a question-asking culture where everyone is comfortable asking questions, and again, this is from the CEO all the way down to where you can ask me, so how come there aren't a lot of African Americans in technology? And to Sarah's point, allow me to explain it. She knows why there are Indians in technology, because culturally that's something that they lend themselves towards. But if anyone in here wants to ask me about the African American community as it relates to technology or some other things that we unfortunately have not had the opportunity to tap part into, I'm more than happy to have those conversations. So the hard conversations became the norm, and they still are the norm. And at this point, during conversations that I may have with senior leaders, it's so not a big deal. Whereas a year ago, it was tough, it was uncomfortable, it would make you queasy. But at this point, it's so not a big deal, as long as, and we came up with the rules behind it. There are no silly questions. Don't cut a person off in a meeting if they're asking you a question. Ask me about my culture. We celebrate Juneteenth. We have special programs for LGBTQ community where we celebrate pride. We celebrate women. We celebrate African American community. We celebrate the Indian community. We celebrate different, and we celebrate. Mm-hmm. We celebrate. It is a thing. So the more that this is being entrenched in our culture, the easier the conversations are becoming. And in terms of actual hiring, because now we're seeing those brown cards, it's actually making a tremendous difference.
That's amazing. Yeah, so it's those intentional actions on equity for all, built on trust. You've established the trust because you have the culture of inclusion.
Absolutely.
In place. And so those questions could be asked, and you could have those candid conversations, and continuing the educational process.
Absolutely.
So it's great. Very good. Nikki, I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, so one of the best practices that I've seen was the director for the position I was applying for had a number of resumes. They removed any demographic information, location-based information. They removed everything. Even if there was a bio, they removed all that and went based on skills. And so the managers didn't even know who they were interviewing until they showed up for the interview. So they couldn't bring any of that unconscious bias or anything like that to the interview until it was like, hey, I see they have these skill sets. One, I want to interview them, and two, now I'm excited to meet this person. You know, it's like, oh, I see they have these skills, this is what I'm looking for, and now I just want to sort of meet the person. And those conversations were so much easier in that interview than I think I've ever had. Because I showed up to the interview and it was like, oh yeah, we're familiar with your skill set. You know, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what do you like to do? So the conversation became more about who are you as a person. We're interested in getting to know you than walking me through, like, I've done technical interviews and things like that. It wasn't this 2-hour-long technical interview about this and that. It was, they felt comfortable with my skill set and just wanted to get to know me. So I think that was a really successful exercise. And I think from that process, they ended up having a more diverse candidate pool because it was, it wasn't based on names or anything like that. It was just skill sets. And the other thing that I found, sort of speaking on having some of those tough conversations, after I was hired, the conversation was, we understand that we don't have a diverse team yet. We're working on that. We address it, we understand it, we see it, and we'd love it if you'd introduce us to other people. So that conversation went from, we're nice to meet you and we're excited to work with you, and also, can you recommend other people? We'd love to meet other people. So that open conversation became a really positive experience, and really led to more networking, meeting more people. So I would say that was really that two-part, was that initial interview process that was incredibly successful, and the follow-on conversations that happened afterward that were positive. They noted the issue, they were aware of it, and they were working on it. And so I think those two together, this sort of initial process and then follow-on process afterwards, this continuing conversation, really made a big difference.
That's great. That's great that they did that, and it's about, talking and taking the action, moving forward to drive that change. So that's wonderful. Those gender neutral terms for job recs are really cool too. Making sure putting it through a scan, a gender neutral scan, is really, really helpful. It's helped a lot of companies just doing that one little action. Or having other women on the team look at the job recs and saying, okay, because the soft skills get moved up for men and women themselves, at least in the cybersecurity workforce. So those are skill sets that you also want to have on top of that list. So those are great recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add one more note about job descriptions, there's a lot of research out there about how technical jobs typically use verbiage and language that are, more geared towards one gender versus another, or, a specific type of person. I saw a job rec. It was short and simple. It had maybe 5 requirements instead of 15, so something a little smaller. And the last line on the job rec I thought was brilliant. It said, even if you don't think you have the skill set, apply. We want to see your resume and we want to talk to you. So it left it wide open for anyone to feel comfortable and say, take a deep breath and say, okay, I may not have all the skills, but I'm going to apply and give it a shot. So I think that sort of language for anyone to include diversity across different groups is really important for job recs.
Yeah. So they took out their wish list, which is something we're always talking about with hiring practices. Take out your wish list. I mean, it would be nice if everyone had that, but there are no unicorns in the industry. And then, ask for and then know that on-the-job training is an essential part. I mean, especially in technology, you're going to hire someone, IBM, a Target, whether it's a Cyber Fusion Center, you're going to teach them the new skills, new skill sets, the new tools on the job. Anyway, so you need to bring them in with a certain level, but you can't have everything on your wish list. So I love that. All right, David, from an inclusion and diversity perspective.
Yeah, and I like what Nikki had shared. I saw a job rec that I loved. The last bullet point after it was like 10 said must have a sense of humor. So I think that's always good too. But I think, from a recruiting standpoint, often people's biases kick in about which schools to go to recruit, especially early talents. So they go for the shiny names out there. And one, there's a small pool there anyway, and a lot of companies are going after those folks, and I think that that's, kind of the mistake for some companies in some places is the recruiting from there. In reality, we actually have a lot of great local community colleges here in the Chicagoland area and in other cities that are a great pool of resources for recruiting talent and often get overlooked and missed. And so I encourage folks to do that, and even our own recruiters, making sure that they're looking at that list and not discounting going to like a Malcolm X college or Harold Washington or others that may not have that catchy little name attached to it, but the talent is there just as good, if not better. So from a recruiting standpoint, the other thing is, are your recruiters trained on diversity, equity, inclusion, to be thinking about attracting diverse talent? Because if that might be also a problem there, where there might be some biases that you might need to work through with your recruiting team. From a programmatic standpoint, I manage a couple of programs. So I mentioned military veterans. They have great skills. They've been working with technology that is so sophisticated and complex that they could maybe, they don't match perhaps what exactly you might be looking for. Once again, I call it the walking on water effect of what your job request is or requisition is. That doesn't mean that they may not be a good fit and could very easily take on responsibilities that they're known to do. So what we did is we created a military veteran program where we recruited directly from certain parts of the military bases that open their doors and say, these people are going to be transitioning to civilian life. And so one of the things we did is recruit openly with them. And found lots of great talent that way, and diverse talent. And we're a great match for many of our goals. But in order to do that, you also have to support the employee. And so if you are going to embark on something like that, in our program, we matched them up with other military veterans that we had hired, had been in the organization for a few years as a buddy program. It was really successful. Our retention rate was close to about 90-something% in the first year of that. Because we were seeing drop-off prior to that. We were losing folks, and that was because they were being placed in a culture that they didn't have someone that understood them and their background and their experience. And so they were saying, this is not for me, and they would leave after the first second year. That's when we had the highest drop-off. So I think those are some of the things, and you can say military veterans or any groups, right? Diverse communities like that, have something in place, that thinks about what are the needs that employee might have. And try to build around that. And you can pilot it out. You don't have to start with 150 people. You can start with 10 and just try it as a pilot program. We got rave reviews for that. The same we did for a program where we matched talent that we identified as this is the talent we want to keep. And it was primarily women and people of color, and we matched them with an executive as a mentor. In a way to introduce them, and the specific ask of the mentors, which the executive leadership team was, get to know them, get to know what their goals are, even if it may not be aligned to what you're doing now, but other people around the table that you should say, you should talk to my mentee because they're interested in going into marketing. I'm not in marketing, I'm in technology, but guess what? This person would be great for you to be with. So they opened the doors for them, and it was used as a retention tool. So those are just a couple of examples that I can provide, from my own experience that have worked really well.
Yeah. It's about building a community and also offering the networking opportunities on top of that. So, love it. And Sarah, from the CISO's perspective, some best practices, because we're seeing lots of different shifts and changes, and CISOs and executives working with talent acquisition, inclusion, and diversity efforts.
Yeah, so one of the things we work on is what Nikki had mentioned. So we actually rewrote all of our job descriptions firm-wide. So we were allowed maximum 6 bullet points. So that research that she's referring to is, it first was initiated by Harvard, and so they did a cross-study for about 4 years or something like that. And then there was a lot of other research that was done. So what was found is that when you have an extensive job requirement sheet that's written out, the requisite usually attracts so the psychology between a male applicant and a female applicant is a male can match up to 30% and feel confident about applying, and a female can feel she needs to feel 80% of it needs to match in order for her to actually apply. So therefore, you right off like that, you have a lot more male applicants because they're just looking for a 30% match. And then you have a lot of females that hold themselves out because they don't feel like it's a good match for them just because they're missing that 20%. So therefore, when you reduce and just, get all that jargon out and really put down what you're actually looking for, what is a requirement versus a nice to have, then you really start getting into the qualified applicants, a cross section of your diversity groups, and it's just welcoming, and therefore it's much easier to really kind of digest all of those applications and see who you want to talk through. I did like the point that she brought up about maybe perhaps removing some of the name and just focusing right on to the requirements. So that's something that I'll probably take back and see.
I'm definitely going to steal that one too.
Yeah, and generally what I've done is, and a few other executives do the same, if there's a junior position hired by personality or ambition, because the technical skills can easily be taught, but if someone's driven or they're just thirsty to learn, that is going to give you the biggest retention. So on my team of 50, we've only had 2 people quit so far. We've maintained the majority of them, and I've been there 8 years. And now,
It's very
yeah, and I think it's very important to understand your employees. Like oftentimes we want to give them bonuses and packages and whatnot, but I try to sit down and understand from my direct reports what they're looking for. And oftentimes they're asking simple things like, I would like to get trained on XYZ platform. I want a training package. I want up to, whatever it may be. And it may not be just, they just want an increase in their salary, or they just want, a bonus at the end of the year. They may be asking for, I'd like to see the seat at the monthly executive meetings, or just have a 5-minute presentation so I can go over what I'm covering. So just understand your employees, see what they're looking for. I think just it overall helps understand who you're working with, because they might be a great fit to grow into the next position. And sometimes it's okay to have someone who isn't eager like that, because I can't promote everyone, I don't have a position for everyone to continue growing. So if someone's doing a good job and they're happy, then just make it easy for them, make them comfortable, understand what they're looking for, and just give them what they're looking for.
Can I ask a question? Does everyone understand what they're talking about as it relates to job recs that are geared towards males or men? Are we on the same page? Or no? I just wanted to make sure that there was a solid understanding.
No, I think that's a good point, because
To what extent are job recs and job descriptions different?
I'm sorry?
To what extent are job recs and job descriptions different?
Did you want to?
no, I was just going to say, I don't think they are, to be honest. I think there's a combination of both there, but
I
typically.
think we all understand what job descriptions are.
Right.
And a job rec is one of this job description or 6 of this job description.
Well, a lot of job recs will have language such as opposed to saying, can you drink water, right? It'll have language in there that gears itself towards, after the 6 bullet points, a lot of people would want to put in there strong will, right? So this language that gears itself towards
Masculine.
Testosterone.
masculine
Rock star.
approach, rock star,
Right.
right?
Ability to exceed, something like that.
Right.
Strong communicator, which people define that as like a leadership skill, but you could be a very strong leader and not necessarily resonate with these terms of like strong communicator.
Or who defines what's a strong communicator?
Right. It's all those.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and listen, I'm guilty of it. I think I told all of you when we first met, what made me know that I was also guilty of this was not when I got married. I've been married almost 30 years, but when I had daughters. And I had to apologize to my wife. I said, Nikki, I didn't know. I didn't know I had these biases towards language and what I saw as the cultural norm. Until I had daughters, and it was my daughters who were like, Dad, that doesn't make sense. Or Dad, let me tell you what happened in class. Or Dad, let me tell you what happened with what this boy told me. Or so I started listening to them, and they're the ones who started chipping at the rock in my brain in terms of what is a strong communicator? What language are they attracted to? What makes them feel comfortable? And when we're talking about inclusion, the first word we need to start thinking about is comfort. Are you comfortable here? Are you comfortable here? I'm comfortable in the midst of a room that's the majority of white males. I was raised like that. But I also know that a lot of folk who are African Americans are not raised how I was raised in the environments I was raised in. I live in Frankfurt, which is majority white. My kids are comfortable. But what does it take to make other people comfortable in a room that is not inclusive of, or that doesn't contain them, right? So one of those things is you have to pay attention to the language.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that I think it's a free tool, so you can take your job description or right, and run through to see, is it skewed more towards masculine words and language, or is it gender neutral so that it appeals to both, or is it skewed more feminine? So
What is this resource?
I'll have to look it up, but I promise I'll get it for you because I've used it in the past.
Let me, something was said here that was, I think we could all agree on. At first blush, but then I looked at it and I thought about myself, and I said, this didn't used to be me. And the thing I'm thinking of is, must have a sense of humor. Until about 12 years ago, I was somewhat depressed, and I had seasonal affective disorder on it, on top of that. And so must have a sense of humor. Oh, I'm great in the summers. Literally, that's what it was. But then my doctor said, my primary care physician said, why don't you try taking generic Prozac? Because I think if you are less depressed, you will have lower blood pressure. I don't remember how much that happened, but after 2 weeks of taking it and it finally taking hold, I can tell you that the first morning I woke up after it had taken hold, I said, this is a different world today. So, when you say it must have a sense of humor, what do you do about untreated, depressed people? That's diversity.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to throw that out as sort of one of those hidden characteristics that's hard to work with.
I would agree 1,000%. If I could jump in here without dominating the conversation. I have someone on my team who has an extreme case of ADHD. You know her, Sally. Well, I don't want to call her name, they may know her.
Yeah. Best friends.
But she has an extreme case of ADHD. She's one of my lead recruiters. She is phenomenal. Phenomenal. And during the interview process, they included her in the interview when she was interviewing me to be her boss. And I asked her, what do you need from a leadership standpoint? She paused and she said, I would need you to understand that I have an extreme case of ADHD. I'm very good at what I do, but I need to be managed accordingly. So we have calls and she's fidgeting with her hair. She sits with her legs crossed. Her dog jumps on the table and she starts petting the dog. When I'm telling you, she's one of the most phenomenal recruiters you will ever meet in your life. So just like the responsibility is on if I'm working with a white male or if I'm working with whomever to make sure that you understand me. What that has done for me as I've developed relationships with those who don't look like me is a light bulb went off in my head. I said, oh, I have to understand her. Right? So what you're talking about is true. In that instance, you are that mental health or whatever that is at that
I said depression, nice simple version of mental health.
Absolutely. But at that moment, that is something that has to be acknowledged as a diversity, because that can stand in the way of someone progressing through the company, someone who is very good at what they do, because of others who don't suffer from that, how they would look at it. So I fully agree with you.
And that rec, I think, was just trying to say, the work's gonna be really hard, so you better have a good sense of humor. That's why I think they put that in there. But I would agree with everything that Chip has said, so.
And sir, did you have something to say?
It was to an earlier point, when you were talking about just having girls, and how we end up raising our girls. There's an interesting book called Beauty Sick, and it's actually done by the, she's a PhD, she did a PhD in child psychology, I believe it was. But it just talks about how we treat our girls versus our boys, and just that girls often get complimented on how they look, and boys often get complimented on how they played or what they built with their Legos or whatnot. So it just makes you aware of, some of these biases that we do have in how we compliment our kids. And rather than saying someone, like a girl looks pretty, she talks about how we should say, I love how you paired your outfit, because it gives more credit to the creativity behind it or the effort. So it's just interesting, because I think that ends up manifesting into some of the, discrepancies or gaps that we see today. But I think now that we have a lot of tools, we have a lot more access to, information, and like, I guess TikTok videos are now the way that we learn certain things. It's all just important information that we can take in to just understand how do we raise our girls while they enter into, education, and how they get exposed to various fields, and, just the development of girls in general. And then just minority groups like, you addressed, so.
The other thing I just wanted to add to what we heard Nikki talking about, the resumes, taking out the names and any of the demographic information or any information that might lend to a bias. The other best practice is not doing a video interview. Do it all over the phone. Because our biases kick in when we're looking at someone or we meet them. Our unconscious, actually 95% of our thoughts are not unconscious, and studies show it's probably much higher. Meaning that we're making a snap judgment about somebody within the first 10 seconds that we're meeting them. And so I know for myself, I've done a lot of interviews now just over the phone first. I want to, move them on, perhaps then I'll do a video, but that's just been my own kind of best practice, served me really well. And it also takes the anxiety off the candidates, so they're not, having to, worry about, saying everything right and doing it a little more relaxed is what I've observed when I've done that.
So what your suggestion is, what we do in cybersecurity is anonymize data
Yes.
and put it, somewhere that it's a safe place that anyone could look at it. I mean, you're suggesting that we do the same thing. I think that's a great idea
Absolutely.
for the hiring process.
Yeah, and so to Sarah's point, a lot of things lend itself when you're raising boys, you raise them to be risk takers. And when girls take risks, when young girls, when you're raising them, take risks, you're always like, oh, be careful. You don't want to rip your skirt, or look at your hair now you're a mess. Now we got to fix you up again. And so we're like almost getting, and to shift that mindset from an early age is really important. And a lot of great cyber teams that have incredible diverse talent, and what you asked the leaders, what they did different is that they took risks. They took risks on their teams, and also they didn't accept no as an answer when it comes from their recruiting staff,
Right.
how they're recruiting the talent and bringing it to the table.
I heard an interesting story from a CISO and then his chief security architect. He said he was hiring people that had no cybersecurity experience whatsoever, but they had common sense.
We build out a lot of programs at WESIS where we're looking at grit and determination all throughout the process, and it's tiered programs. And within less than a year, we provide those individuals that get accepted into the program. And when we start out with 900, we tier it down, and the final recipients will receive advanced SANS certifications, and we'll get them placed in cybersecurity careers in less than a year. But the whole entire program, so we often say, let's look at the untapped talent. Well, this program literally puts the time and the attention, because it's time. We can very easily throw out a CTF and pick the top cream of the crop, the top scorers, and put them through the advanced certifications, and then have them placed in their cybersecurity careers. But instead, we're taking the actions that we're all talking about, we're making a difference, looking at that grit and determination. how hard they try, how they want it, and the
Right.
difference that they're making in the workforce. Those are the best, the hires from that team is just amazing. Going back to inclusion, like the language that we use in cybersecurity workforce, we put together an inclusive language doc because whitelist, blacklist, sanity check, these are all things that impact people's lives. And we even have it boiled down to inclusive language, like you guys, we're from Chicago. We say, hey, you guys, like this is how we grew up. When I walked in, people were like, let me check you guys in. I'm like, oh my God, but you could check me in.
Well, that's
Yeah, so it's like these things, it was very hard for me. I wanted to get into every meeting myself. And
But that's,
so
it's only from the south side.
Yeah, no, yeah, I am a South Sider. But that was very hard. I mean, it's sometimes it does slip out, and it's not being shamed. Like I'm not shaming anyone or shaming myself when those actions, even coming from me, come out. It's just being like, oh wow, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to say, I'll address everyone as folks or team or a crew or things like that. But those inclusive language makes a difference, and in cybersecurity it certainly does, is to make your team feel safe, comfortable, trusted, and moving forward with the right tools. Okay, there's so many different areas that we covered up the whole panel, so we're all, no, I'm just kidding. There's so many different ways we could lend ourselves to, but let's go into unconscious bias. And so for us, like with WESIS, we started a racial equity committee, and which is now our equity advocacy committee. But what was interesting for us is we provided these leadership series to start talking about what will make others uncomfortable at times, create a safe space, so that we can keep talking about it and we could all learn from each other's experiences as the tool that helps us show up tomorrow as a better version of ourselves. So that was what the Racial Equity Committee has brought on board. What was so interesting to me is when we launched our leadership series, because we have over 500 leaders in a leadership volunteer capacity with us, when we launched that, you don't know what you don't know. And so we say these words like unconscious bias, just like in cybersecurity. We can speak MFA. My son's like, you're saying these words I know nothing of. And I'm like, here we have, Jen Easterly talking nonstop about MFA, but we're not even peeling it back to, let's describe what multi-factor authentication even is and how simple it can be implemented. It shouldn't be so hard. So it's always coming back to the education piece. So when we launched that, I was like, wow, we say unconscious bias, we say microaggressions. We know microaggressions are like death by 1,000 paper cuts, when it comes after time and time again. But we never take the time to educate others. So share with me a little bit about your experience with unconscious bias or microaggressions and educating, and what have you seen shift and change in the workforce just within the past 2 years? Because I think the social injustice, political unrest, there's been a lot of pandemic. There's been a lot that's really bringing more empathetic leadership to the table, and conversations are definitely more freely discussed about this. So.
One thing that I would say, well, I was taught that there was always a silver lining, right? So that's just how I was taught as a kid by my parents. So you look at everything that's been happening in America in the last 2, 3, 4 years, and it's kind of hard to see the silver lining. But then you think to yourself, it brought everything to the surface. So all of these things that were either in the back of our minds, or for some people it was a conscious bias, whatever it was, whether it was unconscious or conscious, the silver lining, the blessing, if you will, by the universe or God or whatever you believe, the blessing is the fact that it brought everything to the surface. And not just deep-rooted prejudices. No, not at all. I'm talking about things that were sitting in your unconscious mind, and you actually didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, it gave people the strength to actually speak up. So I go back to mind you, my daughters will tell me anything, right? So they're not shy about telling them, Dad, he's ridiculous. But they became more articulate about it. They became more thoughtful about it. They became more purposeful in terms of helping me understand. Because a lot of times, fortunately or unfortunately, it is the disenfranchised responsibility to speak on it.
And educate us.
And educate, whether that's fair or unfair, is, as an African American, if you would like to know the struggles of the African American community, it's my job to help you understand that. Nobody else can do that because they're, well, outside of if you're an African American. So I think that has been the blessing, if you will, of everything that has happened in the recent past. It has stirred things up and it's brought everything to the surface, and we have to look at it. And now it has to be addressed. It's front and center. It's in your face. It's in your face.
And hit those conversations right
The
up.
conversation's hard. Let's ask the questions. Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
So.
love it. Nikki?
Yeah, so I have 2 points on this one. One, I would say very personally, in the last couple of years, I have very much, just as you were saying, sort of found my voice and said, you know what, it's okay to talk about this stuff. Because I feel like for a long time there really was a stigma around saying, hey, you know what, that's not really okay. You can't really say that. Or, hey, let's try to talk about this in a different way. There was almost like a stigma behind, speaking up and saying, this isn't quite right. And I feel like by having those conversations, and I'll give one very specific example, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that's experienced this, but being in a team meeting and, I'll say, okay, I have an idea to solve this problem. And constantly getting, that's not a good idea, that's not gonna work, that's not good. Okay, all right, fine, we'll move on. 10 minutes later, someone else will say the same idea. Everyone's like, oh man, that's a great idea, gosh, what a good idea. And I used to not say anything, right? It would just move on. But I've gotten that voice and said, well, I did make that suggestion. Do you think that that's a viable suggestion, or something like that in a polite way, but just saying, yep, I did bring that up. That has actually really improved the communication I have between my team, because I can speak up and say, hey, you know what, we did talk about that. Do you guys think that that's still good? And turning the conversation around a little bit, I have found that my colleagues feel more comfortable talking to me too. So I think opening that door and giving a voice to anyone on the team, I think, is really important. The other thing that I've seen change in the 2 years, one of the other things I do is I co-host a podcast called the Resilient Cyber Podcast, and we had a brilliant guest on. Her name is Tia Hopkins. If you haven't heard of her, she's a CISO. She's amazing. She told me that once you get to a certain point in your career, you have a responsibility to others. To take on diversity, to take on inclusion, wherever you are in the industry, right? Whether it's cybersecurity operations, development. And so I know I personally have also made a concerted effort to work with underprivileged communities, I work with Capital Technology University here in Maryland, and they help with a lot of the local communities in providing opportunities and scholarships to people that may not have had access to that. I can't remember the quote, I'm going to get it wrong, but something like, when you bring everybody together on a wave, a tidal wave, I'm going to screw this up, but when you bring everyone together, everybody succeeds.
Yeah.
And I've really seen that shift in the last 2 years, that people seem more willing to, number one, listen, but also take responsibility and say, I could be part of the problem or I could be part of the solution, and I see more people stepping up and not being afraid to share their experiences.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I can't think of that. I can't think of what you're thinking of.
A
When one ship rises
rising
high.
tide lifts all boats.
There you go. I'm like, I know there's a boat there.
Is that right? A rising tide lifts all boats.
Oh, a rising tide, yes.
Wait, what's the
Thank you
word?
for that, Nikki.
Sorry?
Rising tide?
I think it's a rising tide lifts all boats.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it. You did it.
$1,000.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is why I don't tell jokes. I screw them all up. I can't remember the order, yeah. But that's it.
Yeah. I don't tell jokes either. I think I'm funny a lot of times, but it doesn't happen. David?
Yeah, I think, I've taught conscious bias and led a lot of discussions around it for several years now with leaders of all levels and even just people who are not leaders as well. But I think one exercise that I often encourage people to do is, draw a circle and put in diverse groups in that circle: Latino, Asian, Black, LGBTQ, veteran, people with differing abilities. Do that and then list out the people you know that are close friends of yours, or perhaps that you spend a lot of time with for each of those groups, or that you have some knowledge of those groups. As an exercise, I lead people through this. And what that will do is expose you to see what your blind spots are. That will show you where you really need to understand how your bias can creep in. Because if you don't have, under women, many women that you can list, right, or familiarity with some of the issues impacting those individuals, right, or that group, then that is your challenge. That is where I would encourage you to spend some time. And I'm going to sound like that guy from the Viking commercial, but I love when he said the owner of the Viking travel company says, be naturally curious. And that's what I would encourage you to be when it comes to that exercise. Be naturally curious about that group. I did that exercise with a leadership team in Milwaukee, and it just so happened that it was Pride weekend. And I said to them, so how many of you are going to the Pride Fest down the street? And they all looked at me and said, what's that? And I said, our company is a major sponsor of that, so I'm sure you saw the email that came out from our CEO talking about it. And they're like, what email? What are you talking about? And then they said, so I explained what Pride Fest is. It was LGBTQ festival. And then they were just looking at me like, why would we go to that? We're not gay or lesbian. And I said, that's not the purpose of going there. The purpose of going there is to learn more about that community, to spend some time getting to know individuals, maybe even going with some of your coworkers who can help you, show you, and teach you about that diverse community in ways that you probably wouldn't be able to do perhaps on your own. And so I think that that's kind of what I would share with folks is which group are you not really familiar with or maybe struggle with. For me, I'll tell you, we all have biases, by the way, newsflash. For me, it's, we were talking about earlier, my niece, she's younger, and so I noticed that there's a bias I have towards younger adults. I feel that they speak a different language than I do sometimes, but I've been trying to consciously make efforts to slow down, ask questions, learn more, and understand. And I think if you follow that path with any of the groups that you, on that wheel that I just mentioned that you might have circled, you're going to be in a good place.
I love it. On Twitter, I often post anyone over the age of 45 needs to be mentored by someone under 30 because their diversity of thought matters. And it's over. If you want to stay relevant and keep up with it, you need to be mentored. So a reverse mentoring program is always a very good one to have. But David, I love all those ideas. It's very good, very creative. And Sarah, we'll wrap it up with Sarah.
No, what I would probably just add to what Nikki was saying, that she probably did a great job answering the question. Some of the microaggressions that, this is more at a practical level, that I do see having, it occurs quite a bit, is just oftentimes if you're in a meeting or a conference table, there's oftentimes somebody gets cut off or gets spoken over just because they may have a softer voice. Generally, females have softer voices. There might be minorities that just maybe are a little bit more softer in the way they speak, or there's certain personalities that are just a little bit more timid, not necessarily, less intelligent or anything like that. So when we're not speaking, we also just need to make sure that we're listening to what everyone's saying and that we give people the voice that they need if they've been spoken over. So call out the action if it happens in a polite way. So I'm sorry, you were saying something, or can we circle back to it so you can finish your thought? And that's a very nice and polite way without, disrespecting anyone, but giving that person space to be able to speak. And I think that helps make meetings more productive, and it will give that confidence to that person that may have been spoken over to next time be able to either speak louder or learn how to hold their space, but it's our responsibility to facilitate that for them. So I think if we're in that, we should just be aware of when it's occurring and help, wherever we can, and just be aware if we're doing it ourselves.
So I think we're getting close to time. I'd like to jump in with 2 points, and maybe panelists want to pick one of them, but it's what we're talking about here has real world consequences. And I'll take one from the input side and from the output side, on the old 1970s input process output guy. At the end of the day, from the input side, you know, what do you think about these AI algorithms that are part of the interviewing process, that are looking for, I do a lot of dog training, so talk about micro expressions on the faces and things like that. At the end of the day, the AI is part of the interview process, or it actually does the interview. I have issues with that because the people writing the algorithms have the biases built into them. So there's a real world consequence of these biases taking shape or form. We talked a lot about this, you know, the human interview. What about these mechanical interviews to me? Then from the output side, we just, there's something, you know, pre-pandemic, you see these viral TikTok videos about the air dryers or the soap dispensers were written, the algorithms and the sensors were designed by white men sitting in a room, and they never tested on the dark skin. So now we see these biases go through to the product and services that are actually delivered to the consumer. So maybe pick one of those points, but what does the panel's take on? You know, there's one thing about taking your company to that level. It's another thing now, the products and services we're actually delivering to the marketplace.
Can I take the second point?
Sure.
Do you know how hard it is for me to get good light when I'm doing a Teams call or a Zoom call?
Yeah.
Like seriously, that is so true.
Yeah.
It's because the technology was written or made for lighter skin, or taking pictures with an iPhone. It is hard for a dark-skinned person to get the correct lighting, but you're correct. But it also, for me, it goes back to the sense of humor. To me, it's funny. Right, and the only reason I'm okay with it, I'm not okay with it not being fixed, but I'm okay with the slip is because as an African American, I have to be open enough to the mistake, right? So I think that's also a part of the conversation. You know, I have to be open enough to say, can you believe this phone doesn't pick up dark skin, right? But they're fixing it. Did you know that when they first made, well, I guess everybody knew this, when they first made the emojis, they didn't have dark skin.
Yeah.
They didn't have dark skin. Not only that, when I first started sending the thumbs up and I chose the darker skin, I felt uncomfortable. Because now I'm thinking, I don't know why I felt uncomfortable. I have no clue. But now I've gotten comfortable with it. I sent Sally a thumbs up on the way here. But it took me like a year to become comfortable sending a black thumbs up, right? But to your point, it becomes, there's a sense of humor to me behind it. And as long as it's not done with ill will or some bad intent, and as long as it's corrected, and as long as I'm in a world where it's being caught and it's being addressed, I don't know if that's ever going to change, but as long as the conversation is progressive, that's what I like. It's a progressive feeling conversation. My kids are better. My kids are better. The things that my kids think about are more inclusive, right? So I see the world becoming better. I see 20 years ago, we wouldn't be sitting in this room.
But on that process and output side, I mean, literally, you have to take it to the DevSecOps teams. You've got to take it to every endpoint of the business unit and push it out.
Wow.
And that's why the diverse talent on all those teams is absolutely critical. And it's not just gender, it's identities, ethnicities, cultures, experiences, races, and more. That's the diversity of
That is such a phenomenal point.
I just wanted to go back to your first one about the AI, and I am not a fan of that.
I'm not a fan.
And I'm not a fan also for a number of reasons. Studies also have shown that companies that use tests to kind of try to weed out candidates are failing miserably at attracting qualified talent in some cases because of that same reason. So from my perspective, I'm not a big fan of that, because someone may not be a good test taker. That doesn't mean that they can't, you know, do and outshine in the role that you're looking to fill.
Are you guys familiar with outcome-driven job descriptions? That's like a lot. Some companies have done it, and we were doing that at IMO when I was there. And there's very few companies doing it, because now I'm back on the agency side and I'm getting job descriptions. And they're all, like you said, they're all bullet point action words, and not the better outcome driven, which is more about the functionality of the outcome of the job than just like all these bullet points of buzzwords.
Go ahead.
I don't know how many people are familiar with outcome driven job descriptions.
I've heard of them. Yeah, I've heard of them.
So I would like to add something based on all that I hear. I'm very happy that we have this panel. As Sarah said, I'm Latina, and normally Latinos are in the technology. I start as Aniki as a help desk, and I get all this patient with my customers until now. I'm working as a program manager in the cybersecurity. Many times I have been tired and say, okay, I'm gonna leave cybersecurity, I'm gonna find another team, but I like what I'm doing. And yeah, it's true, Nikki mentioned about retention and the culture, inclusiveness, right? When I'm looking for jobs, I always look the executive, right? If I see somebody that look like me, I have some possibility to start there and maybe find a better, a position that I can grow up, right? And also about recruiters, because recruiters basically sometimes most of them are male whites, right? And then when they talk to me, maybe they cannot understand me very well, or maybe they have another thinking and they cannot understand what I'm saying, right? They say, maybe you don't fit for the position, and I have been working in cybersecurity for 10 years, right? So it's true that we need kind of people that look like us to make that connection, right? And find new talent, right? And the executive, not just for the roles, like the basic roles in cybersecurity, but also for the executive in cybersecurity. So I'm so happy to see Sarah as a CISO and many women as a CISO too, because I can see there is opportunity to be there as a woman, right? And yeah, I'm happy to see all of you taking the lead on this and make things work for the diversity in the company. So thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Jeanette, remember that the fastest growing demographic in the United States that in 10, 15 years is going to continue to grow at a clip is the Latino market. And that is actually going to be something that people need to keep in the back of their mind as we move forward.
And actually in the financial industry is very extremely, because I have been in cybersecurity in different industries, but in financial industry you can see like there is not many Latinos and not many Black persons, right? And this is, what moved the United States, right? The financial industry,
Yeah, just a fun fact, we actually have an entire team in Argentina, and now we're looking at Brazil, just because the same time zone, so we've just started having, we're basically having them come over and be part of our team, so it's definitely, that's fun.
Very cool.
All right, so we can continue with questions and conversation at dinner. Right? So a few things that I do want to mention is that we have our next virtual event on July 19th. It's Are You Quantum Ready? And that's virtual, so that's in the evening on July 19th. Look at our website, Chicago, or AITPchicago.com. And we have also just opened our team awards. So I don't know if everybody's familiar, we do a lot with awards with the AITP. So we partner with SIM, we have the CIO of the Year Award, we have the CISO of the Year Award, and we have the Technology Team Award to honor everyone and recognize everyone that does the work. So if you know any great teams, please go to the website, nominate them, nominate early, nominate often. We're in Chicago.
I heard that before in Chicago.
And then I do want to quickly introduce Lucy Brennan.
Yeah.
Brennan. So Lucy is with P33, and she has some very exciting information to share.
Cool. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. My name is Lucy.
Come over, Lucy.
Oh gosh, I don't need to do that. You can hear me. I work at an organization called P30. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We are working to equitably advance Chicago's tech economy, but specifically, I manage a program called Tech Rise. We host weekly pitch competitions for early stage BIPOC and women founders here in Chicago. They're all streamed virtually via YouTube. But most exciting and most pertinent to this discussion today is that on July 22nd, we're hosting our first ever cybersecurity competition. And we have 5 great, incredible founders who are preparing to pitch right now, who we're gonna bring to our stage. So I'm gonna send Sally the link to the YouTube so that you all can tune in and check it out day of. We host competitions every Friday at noon. You can just tune into our YouTube channel, have a free minute during your lunch hour. It's like a mini Shark Tank every Friday. And I'm also curious if anybody here specifically, each of these founders who are competing in the cybersecurity competition, we match all of our founders after they've gone through our pitch workshops with mentors to kind of review their pitches and get feedback, potential beneficial network connections through that meeting as well. If anybody here would be interested in potentially mentoring a cybersecurity founder, please do reach out to me and I will figure out a way to get you my contact info. That would be absolutely incredible. Additionally, if you happen to have any experience evaluating early stage startups and would be interested in participating that week as a TechRise judge, we would absolutely love to have you on the stage. It's a 1-hour virtual time commitment. You get to hear these 5 pitches, ask a question of each founder, and at the end of the day, select a winner of a $25,000 non-dilutive grand prize. So thank you all so much for your time. Tune into TechRise.
If you can't find her address, just send something to Sally, and Sally will get it to her.
We'll get it, yeah.
We'll get it.
Connected.
Thank you.
So,
The dinner is served,
that's okay, yeah.
so you have to serve yourself.
I wanted to share with you guys, in honoring a diverse company, I do want to give all the panelists, I'm sorry for Nikki. This is my namesake, Sally. Sally's nuts. This company is founded by a 50-year-old woman and her 89-year-old mother. So, right, so there's diversity there. They make handmade nuts in Highland Park, Illinois, but they're at the grocery stores. So do buy them when you see them. Tell your friends. You can buy online and enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really sweet. Thank you.
We've got a fintech competition this week.
Can we make sure Nikki has a margarita?
Yeah, I know.
Right. Maybe $10,
Right?
Shit, he's already taken it.
This is like a dynamic, dynamic panel, like having all the different unique perspectives. It's like.
The only thing we're going to be here till 8, so.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you. Seeing you virtually.
Exactly. Nice to meet you.
You like, they can't hear us.
No, so, right, okay.